Hello, everyone. This is John Browning with the Building Your Life podcast. We're back again, and today we have a special guest, Annie Yatch. And I've spoken with Annie a couple times already, and I found her very intriguing with some pretty interesting ideas, frankly, about me, which we are not going to talk about today, but we're but we are going to talk about some unique ideas that I think a lot of people are going to find interesting, especially if you're in small business. But even if you're not in small, mid-sized businesses, if you have a corporate executive job and are in a leadership position, some of these ideas are going to, I believe, really help you. And if you stick around to the end, we're going to talk about something that you can get for free, I believe, with a link that we're going to provide in the show notes down below. And I believe the title of that is Seven Phrases to Connect and Lead at Home. But we're going to talk about that a little bit more later. But Annie, can you just introduce yourself a little bit? Nobody's going to do that better than you, so I'm not even going to try. So just tell us who you are, what you do, why you do it.
Thank you so much for having me, John. It is my absolute pleasure and honor to be here. And for those of you listening, I have been a leadership coach for the past 15 years, working with companies from 1 million upwards of 1.2 billion. I've run my own company, run three other companies, but right now I'm the CEO of Reinvention XO, where I'm considered the Chief Transformation Officer for executives, entrepreneurs, and rapidly scaling teams. So that's
Wow.
just a little bit. But my background, I actually started working in counterintelligence after going to Georgetown University for my undergrad and master's program. And I realized I really can't lie. And I really love helping people reset their brains in a positive way. And that's how I ended up as a leadership coach who was running a couple of different leadership companies.
It can be really difficult, especially in corporate America, to be congruent with that. I'm not very good at lying. Yeah, it's
I just couldn't do it. I'm like too happy, too supportive, too connected. It just doesn't work for me. People could tell if I was lying by like the look on my face. So
yeah,
I had to get out of counterterrorism and I had to go into something that would benefit humanity a little bit differently.
there we go. Oh, I like it. And I like what you're doing now. Again, I can speak to it personally because of the conversations that we have had already. And one of the phrases that really caught my attention that you talk about is your intimate relationships impact your business. And I would love it if you would share that story that you told me about, like when you got up in front of a group of people, what you said to get their attention, just because I thought it was great and it does get your attention.
I would love to. So, I had a speech that I was giving at one point of time to a room of, I think, 500 to 800 people, maybe 1,000. And I got up and I really wanted to make an impact because I don't think most of us realize how the stability or lack of stability in our home environment massively contributes to how successful we are in our professional career and in our scaling and growing of a business. So I got up on stage and I basically said, okay, who in the audience wishes they could have more sex? And almost every hand went up. And then I said, all right, for those of you who are really listening now, how many of you wish that you could learn about better intimacy skills and communication skills that would help you bring that intimacy and that sexual energy into your business, not in a bad way, but in a way so that everything would flow more easily? And almost everybody in the audience raised their hand. And I was like, great, now that I've got your attention, let's dive
Yes.
into how we can make those intimate relationships even more powerful so that they drive your business forward and make business life so much easier. So
Yeah,
yes.
that would definitely get the attention of most people, I think. And I mentioned to you I have a great friend from when I was back in Chicago who essentially wrote the book about intimacy in business relationships, which when he first started speaking on it and wrote the book, all of the tough guys, would be like, yeah, I don't want to be, intimacy in business. What's that have to do with anything? And it really does.
It's
And I thought,
genius. It's genius because if
yeah,
if we want to have really great business relationships, we have to be in them for the long term. We have to be emotionally intelligent enough to have those relationships be powerful. We have to improve our coordination and communication skills because everybody in business is part of our team. So we have to know how to coordinate well as a team. There are just so many skills that happen in the home front that are also required in the business front to be successful. So, for those of you listening, if there are any, instabilities in the home front, or if there's any lack of support in the home front, there's almost always a pattern in the home that, if you resolve it, allows you to really break through the ceiling in revenue in your business.
So, well, first of all, let's dive into this because I don't want people to get like all caught up, right? Because of this word intimacy, right? So let's dive into that a little bit. What does that really mean in business? Because I will say this one thing in my experience,
Mhm.
so professional experience for 34 years, been doing almost 35 years now. I've found that everything that I've done that's been truly like impactful and moved me forward has taken some time,
True.
like some real time, some real grit. We're not talking like a couple weeks, a couple months, or even a lot of times a couple years. It takes some time. So, intimacy, if I'm, you correct me if I'm wrong, intimacy takes time. Am I right?
It does. It takes time, and I think it also takes emotional intelligence, takes a willingness to be vulnerable. The formula that I use for intimate connection or connection in general is there has to be authenticity, there has to be vulnerability, and there has to be trust. As we know, that takes time to develop. And it also takes time to show the person that you're building that intimacy with or connection. I like to use the word connection because I think it's less provocative usually for people. If we
Yeah.
want to build connection with someone, we really have to show up as authentically ourselves. We have to be very vulnerable and be willing to share. And we also have to be very trusting that the other person can show up for us in that same way. And I don't know what you think about this, but I found that so many times in our relationships in business, people make them very transactional. And they make them transactional because in their home environment, they've had a transactional environment, either from the way their parents raised them or the way they've chosen their partner. And so instead of having transactional relationships in business, you have to show people that you're in this for the long haul. You're in this for the length of the relationship so you can both build something positive with each other. And that does take time, but when you do it the right way, the results are incredible.
So how do you do that in a business relationship with the caveat that first of all, it does take time.
Mhm.
But as you're starting the relationship, how do you start it and lay the base the right way? What are some practical suggestions for
So,
people?
very basic practical solutions for people in this regard are you have to show up and be congruent. So, if you say you're going to do something, you need to show up and do that thing. You also want to meet the person's energy level, right? So, if someone comes in super excited and excited about the connection, you got to be super excited about the connection, right? It's almost like
Yeah.
mirroring authentically, right? You're going to mirror their behavior, their enthusiasm, because that's something that's going to resonate with you and with them over time. And then the other piece of it I would say is, one of the key core messages that I bring when I coach people is I'm like, you can't be in partnership with somebody in business if you don't have similar core values. And we always assume people have the same core values as us because we don't spend a
Mm.
lot of time talking about what are your core values? What's your mission? What's your why? Where do you want to go in your life? The more we have that information from people and we go deep in that conversation early on, the more we can actually build a future with that person, whether they're a partner, an affiliate, or even a vendor or a client of ours.
Okay, you just hit on something that I found really interesting and something that I frankly have struggled with, right? Is you can tell people what your core values are, and there's a tendency for the other party to say, "Oh yeah, that's my core value too." And then you find out a little later, maybe it's
And it's
not really their core value.
so
How do you deal with
yeah.
that?
So here's how we deal with that. So I'm very different. A lot of the work that I've done and the processes I work people through come from working with the Navy SEAL teams. So back when I started off in counterterrorism, I worked with some of these really elite warriors, and I found it so fascinating the way their brain worked that I backwards engineered how they thought about planning for elite missions to help me deeper identify what are the core values of people and what are their purposes and do they intertwine, do they fit? So I've done this with probably I want to say probably 100 different partners that were thinking about coming together. I've sat them both down and instead of asking, well, what's your core values? What are, let's share core values. What I do is I go into the background of their experience in business because what I'm looking for is what have you both experienced in business that would prevent you from being good partners today? Because every businessman or woman has some traumatic pattern, a moment where they felt a loss of control in a partnership that they then use as something that triggers them in every partnership moving forward. So for me, I like to know what are these things that have triggered you in the past to figure out can we build a great partnership with who you are now? Or knowing that you have these shared backgrounds, what does that mean for the action you can take together and the behavior that may or may not work in the relationship? So, this is a big gap I find in business in particular. People do not spend time looking at the greater why and the background of people they're thinking about partnering with. There's not enough due diligence done there on the mental and emotional side.
Yeah. So you have to really, you have to not only ask the question, you have to look and find, and this is the key thing. How do you find that? Right? Because
So,
if it's like when people ask for references, they're not going to give you people that don't like them, right? So
correct. They won't.
you have to go do the work and you have to find that.
Yeah. And it's different what you ask people that are their references versus what I would ask if I have both potential partners on a call. So I have a very specific process that I work people through if two partners are thinking about doing business together on a call, where I walk through a series of very explicit questions that each person answers. People get somewhat vulnerable in that conversation. And at the end of it, we put together a statement of what their shared values are together as they move forward. And once you have that, it's almost as though you have a way to hold the person accountable to what you've previously agreed to, which allows you to manage behavior and reactions and triggers and responses in a whole new way because now you have a shared vision for the future that you've both created from your background, no matter what the background is. So that's very different than if you're going to call references and ask specific questions there. I do both. I give people very unique questions for both because I feel like when you're about to partner with somebody, it will either make or break you. It will either create a whole new wounding and massive issues for you in business if that partnership breaks down, or it could be the best possible partnership of your life. But most people err and they think, well, this is going to be the best partnership. It's going to solve everything. It's going to be the silver bullet. But we don't do enough of the pre-work with this potential partner to make sure that we're on the same page. And that's where we lose a lot of power in business.
So if you are thinking about bringing on a partner, or if you are thinking about doing maybe a merger or something like that, because wow, wouldn't it be great? I'm 10 now. I could be 20 by merging with this other firm over here. I'm really excited. Maybe you should call Annie Yatch first just to go through this process. And you only cost what, $200,000-300,000 for something like that, right?
No, I try to make it very feasible for the people that are included. Usually that's something that, depending on the size of the business, it might be anywhere from 2 grand to 5 grand, depending on the process. But it's a 4 hour process and a lot of reflection that happens. But I've never seen a group that did that process not end up in a very epic partnership, making a lot of money together. So that's what my goal is for everybody.
There we go. So the real question is, would you spend two, three, four, $5,000 to make whatever it is that you make?
Or to make
Several $100,000,
right, to
right?
make that foundation so solid that you can make at least what you want to make and more, hopefully, in a long-term partnership that's mutually beneficial.
Right. And now I'm not going to ask you to do this unless you think it's okay. But I am dying to ask you what like one of those questions would be.
Oh, sure. What I like to ask when I go into the history, because I spend a little bit of time on the history of both people. So I'll always say, in business, what have been the hardest lessons that you've learned to
Hmm.
each person? And each person will share some of the biggest, most difficult lessons they've learned in business and what they took out of those lessons. Because we want to look at both people and say, okay, if both of you have had, say, a bankruptcy, or both of you have had a a partner who cheated them. What lesson did you take away? If you both took away the same lesson, then you could actually build a really powerful partnership because you have the same learning. If you take away completely different lessons, then you might not build a big partnership because you might be thinking one person's doing something when they're not. So that's where that question is such a huge one to start noticing, well, what are the patterns of how these two people think? And do they think more similarly or more differently? And how is that going to impact their business future?
No, thank you for sharing that, by the way. Not
Yep.
everybody would share one of those questions, but
I don't
that's
mind.
that's a great point. And I think for me, in my experience, one of the toughest things is to get both parties to truly be vulnerable, because
Mhm.
we have a little pride, otherwise we wouldn't be successful, right? That's not a bad thing, by the way. I don't think, is to have that pride, just not maybe arrogance. There's a
Mhm.
difference there,
For
or
sure.
pretentiousness, but to have the pride and the confidence to be successful, that's got to be there. But then that can, I don't want to be vulnerable to this new person that I just met and that may use it against me. How do you get past that?
Well, I think that's a common fear of almost everybody who's an entrepreneur in business or even a business owner, right? How can I be vulnerable with this person? But what I do is I switch the paradigm up and I say, how can you afford not to be vulnerable with this person? Because if you're going to merge companies or you're going to take on a partner, it's literally like a marriage. And if you don't know everything you need to know about this person before you sign the dotted line, your entire future could be destroyed or made super successful in one blink of an eye. So we really can't afford to not get vulnerable. And what I do is I try to create a really caring environment for everybody by saying at the very beginning, here's the plan today. We're going to dive into some of the biggest moments of your life. You're going to get to be seen and heard in a way you've never experienced before, so that you get to experience what it's like to have somebody reflect to you all the strengths as well as all the learning that you've had in your business career. You're going to leave this call not only with some of the most profound self-awarenesses that you will ever have, but you'll leave knowing that if you were to do business together, you will have a very clear purpose that will drive your missions together. And so, if we can show up vulnerably in that moment with each other, then the outcome is going to be far greater than anything you guys can expect. Are you willing to go all in on this with me and be vulnerable and courageous at the same time? And that's typically something that helps people open up because they can feel I'm in it for the future of the business and for each of them individually. It's not necessarily as relevant as the future of this incredible partnership that they could create. So sometimes you need people to be holding that space for the relationship, the partnership, and it's not always about the individual, but it's about what is the sum total of what we can create together.
Two words that really stood out in what you just said to me were be vulnerable and courageous at the same time, which seems like opposites, but it's really not, right? Because if you're going to be vulnerable,
A lot of
it takes
courage.
being courageous.
It does. It takes a lot of courage. And that's what entrepreneurs are. That's what small business owners are. We're nothing if not courageous because, we have to be. Otherwise, we wouldn't do this. We wouldn't go after time freedom and personal freedom and all these things. So I just really want to cheer on all the entrepreneurs and business owners out there because, you're making such a profound impact and even more of who these people are can be revealed if they're willing to do this self-awareness work.
Mm-hmm. And we've had a couple people on the podcast in the past that have talked about this two things: Generation X, of which I am one, and also this idea of corporate escapee.
Hmm.
And maybe on top of that, the way that the world has changed in our lifetimes. It used to be you got a job out of
Mhm.
college or even out of high school and you worked there for 30,
Years.
40 years. No longer that way. And after a while, I'm gonna stereotype here and say, especially Generation X gets a little burnt out, we'll say, with
Quite burned
corporate
out.
and some of the things that go on in corporate. And by the way, if you are a corporate employee, God bless you. I was one for 28 years. And And I played the game not all that well, but I played the game and moved up in the organization and all that kind of stuff. But I have to tell you, it's been liberating to take the skills that I would not have learned if I hadn't been in corporate America and apply them to what I'm doing today. However, if you're going to grow and scale, eventually you have to partner with people. And
True.
that can be extremely scary. This is exactly what you, and it can be it can be your biggest investment. And it
True.
can completely destroy you or it can completely make you and your
Correct.
business. So the stakes are incredibly high for what you do.
They are for sure. And that's why I look at, everybody either in corporate or in the business world, you reach a point, usually in your 40s, where you've realized something is not quite right. Midlife feels like a crisis when it should feel very different. And that's why I'm hyper focused on reinventing, right? Because reinvention is not something you learn, nobody ever teaches it to you. It's something that you have to earn. And it takes work and it takes effort. But all the people that are coming out of corporate or that are changing the game around their 40s, they're really looking for how can I be me in the world, use all of my skill sets, and also be on purpose. And that transition is so intense for so many people that I just like people to know there's a lot of support out there that can take you from somebody who's transitioning out of corporate into I'm on fire, on purpose. I know where I'm going. I know what my message is. I know how I'm impacting people, and I have the structures and the support to prove it. Because I think what you're talking about, almost everyone who's in corporate hits a burnout phase and they have to decide, am I going to reinvent and use all my skill sets, or am I going to stay exactly where I am and then not soar for the next 30 years because they have no energy to do that? So I think you're 100% accurate. It's definitely, I would say, sort of a pandemic in our culture that we push ourselves to burnout when we're living in that C-suite and that corporate lifestyle.
Yeah. It's certain things are like we perceive them as being not acceptable, like taking time for your family, taking time for yourself. And then sometimes as entrepreneurs, we fall into the same issue because we've got to grow the business. Everything depends on us. We have to work. We have to work, 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 work. And then all of a sudden, the freedom that we thought we were getting has disappeared before we realize it.
Well, that's
And
also
I have,
because, oh,
yeah,
sorry.
I've fallen victim to this right before. But
We
go
all
ahead.
do. We all do. And I
Yeah.
think we fall victim to that because we don't spend enough time on the forefront of building a business to look at how do we make this business serve us instead of how are we serving the business? Because
Hmm.
as entrepreneurs, when we lose our time freedom, it's because we're in service to the business. We are not in service or having the business serve us, which was the whole point of becoming an entrepreneur in the first place. So there's some due diligence and some almost looking at what do we want our ideal day to look and feel like that we have to weave into how we build the business. Because if how we want our ideal day to look and feel like isn't congruent and aligned with how we run our business and what our business requires of us, then we're already losing that entrepreneurial game.
100%. I'm just going to throw this in there too. This I don't know if this really relates or not, but what I have learned and am learning continually is that if you have a client that doesn't respect the fact that you go on vacation every once in a while, that you spend time with your family, that there are certain times that are, off limits, that you have for you and your family, that's not a good client for you. If you have a client that doesn't have the same value set, that doesn't respect you as the business owner, just because they're profitable doesn't mean they're good for you.
True.
And knowing the difference and being willing to say, you know what, I think maybe we should part ways, even though you're giving me a lot of revenue or whatever it is, it's going to be better for me and my family if we part ways. And and as your last act of service, here's a place where you can go, a suggestion of who you might be better suited to work with. One of the hardest things for an entrepreneur to do, and often when you're in corporate, you don't have the choice of whether to do it or not. But as an entrepreneur, you do, and you have to have the courageousness or you have to have the confidence that you can survive without that particular client. I just think that's another point to sort of make for those who might be struggling out there with this whole issue.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think the hardest thing as an entrepreneur is to be so clear on what you value and who you are and what you want to bring to the world and have almost like we call it in real estate a black box of how you choose to buy a com or how you choose to buy a house. You have to have like very specific requirements of who you decide to work with and not. And what I find with a lot of the clients that I'm introduced to or that hear about me, it's just as much an interview on my part to see, is this someone that I want to be
Mhm.
in long-term relationship with, impacting their lives, their families' lives? Because for me, when I work with one CEO, more often than not, they're like, can you work with my wife? Can you work with my ex-wife? Can you work with my children? Can you work with my... It's just amazing because I think once you realize that there's a lot more self-awareness that we can attain, and from that self-awareness, we have huge impact and result changes in business, then it's like, this is the best thing I'm ever going to invest in. And so I think it's really important to know who you are and to be authentic and congruent and make sure that when you say yes to a client, it's somebody who also wants to be in relationship with you for the long term. And if it's not, then it's really safe to say, hey, I have three other different resources that could be great for you. Here's what I think might work. Right? Because again, we have to be so selective. Our time is our most precious commodity. And I feel like most of us are sometimes spending our time in ways that don't really serve us or even our business goals.
Well, I tell you what, my most precious asset that I have is my wife, who I've been married to for 35 years as of August. And of course, my kids and grandkids and everything that came from that. It almost sounds like I like want you to talk to my kids before they get married. Like you
That's,
would be a
I have
great
done that.
marriage counselor. Like
I have done
pre-marriage
that as
counseling would
well.
be huge.
Yes.
Um,
I'm
because
about
that,
to launch a program to help couples have those
yeah,
conversations ahead of time because, I mean, honestly, unless you have a great relationship with your church or your religious institution, a lot of those conversations aren't being had. So if anyone's listening and they have children who are about to make big life decisions, there's a book called 100 Important Questions to Ask Before I Say I Do. That
ooh,
one has been so impactful for the children of the clients that I've worked with. They're like, you have to tell everyone about this book. So 100 Important Questions to Ask Before You Say I Do. Great book to give to your children so that they can think about those questions with their significant others before they tie the knot, before they take that next level of commitment.
yeah, that would be, I think, for you to develop a program doing that, which it would be awesome. But it kind of brings me to, I want to bring this up one more time before we close out, is the 7 phrases to connect and lead at home. Because I think maybe we're talking to a lot of business leaders. They're like, well, I don't know, at home. Wait, I'm talking about business here. I want to learn about business, but they're connected.
They
Give us
are.
just a little bit more flavor of what they'll learn if they click on that link down below. And it's free, right? You don't charge
It's
anything
free.
for it.
Nope, there's nothing. It's I literally just like to put out as much free content as possible. That's why if someone asks me to do a podcast, I'm
Please.
all in. The more we can help people with free information, the
Yeah.
better. Right? So the 7 phrases to lead and connect at home. The reason why this was put together was because so many of my clients were like, tell me that phrase again that you used. Tell me that phrase that was so helpful that immediately dissolved any conflict with me and my wife. And I'm like, let's use these phrases at home to reduce conflict there so that there can be more stability, more connection. And let's see if we can use some of these phrases even in the work environment, which is so wild to think about that you could transfer that knowledge. But what I found over 15 years of coaching people is that there is always a pattern in that relationship that is limiting the growth of their business or their professional career. And once they figure out what that is and they start to reveal it and change it, now all of a sudden they're making more money, they're scaling and growing faster. Their support, whether it's a spouse or a significant other, is all in on them doing well in business. And we don't, I think, any of us realize how important it is to feel seen and heard in the home environment and create that stability. Because from what I've seen, most men or women who are out there in business crushing it, they can't really take those mountains and make those results happen if they feel unstable at home. So it's just a powerful PDF that can help you take all those moments when you think there might be conflict at home and you don't want to feel it and change it, rewire it, change the game really quickly so that you have a lot more power and support in that environment.
Okay, that sounds, I'm going to click on it. So I'm
I've
going to
read
go
them
get
so
that.
many times. Hundreds of clients have loved them. That's why I wanted to gift it to everybody listening here today. I just want to make an impact in your lives, whether it's, free time together or something that's more impactful for you later on in life.
Yeah, so this has been fantastic. Everybody, Annie's information is going to be down below in the show notes. Definitely reach out to her. She can make an enormous difference. I have personal experience in working with her as well. And those of you who maybe are not regular listeners, my name is John Browning. You can reach out to me on LinkedIn, any of my social media channels. I do a morning market update that is 5 to 10 minutes of just diving below the headlines and all the stuff that makes us do and make decisions that maybe aren't in our best interest. Every single trading day, I do that. We also have the Building Your Life podcast and guardianrockwealth.com. Lots of ways to get in touch with me, or grab your cell phone and open the texting app, dial 321-421-5213. Type in the word life. I will not flood you with a bunch of texts or anything else, but you'll get all of my information. Lots of free stuff out there. Annie and I are the same there. I put out everything that I do, how I do it. If you want to try and do it on your own, and that's your zone of genius, you don't need me, but I can give you lots of great information that you can use. So please do that. So, Annie, it's been fantastic to have you on the show. I'm looking forward to more conversations between the two of us. And yeah, just thanks again. Maybe we'll do this again, do a follow-up episode. How about
I
that?
would love to. There's a whole other area that we can talk about which is the neurochemistry of the brain and
Ooh.
how we can boost the neurochemistry of the serotonin, the dopamine, the oxytocin so that you can make better decisions in business. That's a really fun topic too.
And all that stuff is real. I mean, it is 100% real. Some people were like, oh, that doesn't work. It absolutely does. I've seen
Sure
it
does.
work.
I love it. Well,
So,
thank you for having me so much, John. I loved being here. And for everybody listening, thank you so much for allowing us to come into your homes, into your lives to try to support you in a greater way.
all right. And check out those show notes. Again, this is John Browning with Guardian Rock Wealth with the Building Your Life podcast. We'll see you again next time.